Hey everyone, I realized I left out one last step when we were building our layout to our menu here. So if you remember, if we run this thing, we can select things and it should highlight, right? But the idea is that this left-hand panel will fill with inventory items that the player has picked up, and each of those items is meant to have an icon. And I neglected to add a spot for that icon in our layout here. Well, I mean, we know where they're going to go, but there's not an actual image component anywhere for us to put the icon. So what we need to do before we keep moving is find one of the inventory item toggle prefabs here, and right click, and we're going to go to the UI menu here and choose image. So we're going to add an extra image to our inventory item toggle here. So let me just make sure I did that right. Yeah, looks right to me. Now, we don't want the image to just be a white sprite for now. Let's go ahead and plug in a real one just to see what it looks like. So I've downloaded this note icon. I believe we did this earlier in the project, and I'm just going to plug that in to the sprite source image slot here on this new image component. And now we can kind of see how it'll work. So let's run the game and just make sure we have everything like on the right, like sorted correctly. It looks right to me. Maybe we'll run into an issue later if we have a different icon. But anyhow, the icon is in place, or a spot for the icon. It's a placeholder icon. So now we need to update our prefab. So make sure you select the one that we modified. Actually, before I update the prefab, I'm going to go ahead and give this a little bit more descriptive of a name. I'm going to call this the icon image. And you can see this little plus icon here. It means this thing has not been added to our prefab yet. Which the way to do that is select the prefab, go over here to overrides, and choose apply all. Well, make sure that we want to apply all these things. Remember, the toggle group, we can't apply that because it involves something that's outside of our parent object here. So like this inventory item toggle prefab, it doesn't really know about this. So we can't include that. So hitting apply all won't do anything for that. And then doing apply all here will actually add this icon image, which is what we want. So we'll hit apply all, and you'll see this one didn't do anything, but the image did get added. Alright, so now that we have our images in our menu prefab, we can actually make our script for the actual menu functionality. So let's head to the scripts folder. I'm going to right click. I'm going to create a new C# script, and I'm going to call this one inventory menu. Alright, so just as a refresher, I know it's been a while, the player inventory is just pure data. It's just all it is this static list. And we save all of the player's inventory objects in here so we can remember what they've collected. But this new script that we've made, the inventory menu, is going to be used to control all of the logic for what the menu does, how it behaves. So I'm just going to erase the Unity template stuff and start thinking about what needs to be in this inventory menu script. So first of all, regarding the static thing here, we need a way to access our inventory menu easily from other spaces, other classes specifically, right? Somewhere the essentially the inventory object needs to be able to access the inventory menu at some point, or something like that. I'm sure of the fact that we're going to need access to this script from other things, from other classes. And the issue is we can't just do it this easy, this nice simple way that we did here by making it static. Remember, when we make something static, you don't need to have an instance of it. You can just type the name of the class and then type the static member you're looking for and do whatever you want with it. That way you don't have to create a new instance or pass around an instance. And it's super convenient and easy. Well, we can't quite do that in this case, because in this case, the inventory menu is going to have to be a mono behavior. And it needs to be a mono behavior because we're going to actually have to use part of the Unity API or the Unity application programming interface to build the functionality of this menu. So the Unity API are things like start and update and on trigger enter and all that stuff, all the Unity stuff that's in here. And we're going to actually need it this time. It's not going to be just like pure data like this one that actually doesn't need any of the Unity stuff. You can see this is actually grayed out. Let me zoom in a little. So this is actually grayed out. It means we're not actually using anything in here. So I could delete this using statement. It'll still work. So I'm going to go back here and think about if there's a way to still create an easily accessible from outside sources, but also still a mono behavior. How can I do that in this class? And the answer to that, if we go back and revisit our notes here, it lies in this idea of this Singleton pattern. Now, you remember earlier we didn't really use the Singleton pattern because, as this chapter says, generally you don't want to use the Singleton pattern because you can essentially just get away with using static. That's the long story short here, is that Singleton most often is not really necessary, and you can just get away with using static, which is kind of a cleaner solution. There are some unique scenarios where this Singleton functionality is useful. And in a nutshell, the Singleton functionality, what it does is it ensures that a class has one instance and provides a global point of access to it. So we're going to implement the Singleton pattern in Unity this time around. In order to do that, you still have to have a static instance. So basically we're going to make our normal mono behavior, but we're going to create one single static variable inside of it that's accessible to outside sources. So you want to do something kind of like this, where we have a public, well, we have to make a private one first. We'll say private static inventory menu. So in other words, we're going to create a variable of the type of this class itself, and we're going to call it instance with a lowercase I. And then I'm going to make a public property that exposes this to other classes. So we'll say public inventory menu instance with a capital I. And this property is going to need a little bit fancier of a setup than just a normal auto property. So this is kind of the idea of the Singleton pattern right here, where you have a static instance and then a public property for exposing that. Generally what you would do in a traditional Singleton pattern is check to see if there is already, if this variable has been initialized. If there's already one of these instances, then we're okay. Just use the one that we already have. And if there isn't one, then we'll make a new one just to make sure that you can never get a null reference exception here. Because if we try to access this property and there isn't actually one of these made yet, it would be a problem. And I just realized I've neglected to make this static. We want to definitely make this static so that instance is easy to find anywhere. All right, so I'm going to show you what happens if we don't sort of protect against the null reference error here. But first of all, we need to figure out, well, when are we going to ever initialize it ever to begin with? And I think we can just do it inside of a normal awake method. So inside of awake, we're going to say that instance with the lowercase I equals this, basically. So if, assuming we put this script on a game object that's in a scene that we load, awake will get called, and then this instance variable will be initialized, and our instance property will work, and we can access the inventory menu from anywhere, right? So that's when it's working properly. But we have a couple of opportunities for error, and I'm going to illustrate them here. So first of all, let's go find like inventory object here, and just as a test, I'm going to do something like, let's try to do something with this inventory menu instance right now. So let's say that when you interact with an inventory object, just as a test, we're going to say debug.log, and let's try to print the name of the inventory menu game object for fun. And it's just going to be inventory menu, the name of the class, dot instance. That's our nice static property we made that we can access from anywhere. And then we will just say name, just like that. Oops, I gotta go over here and put my semicolon. Okay, so when you interact with an inventory object, we're going to try to print the name of the game object that the inventory menu script is on. And I'm going to show you the problem. So we got to go in here and actually turn everything back on. Remember, we've been in menu mode, so we've got everything, we've got our player and everything turned off. So let's go ahead and turn our player back on. So the player, the rigid body FPS controller, I'm going to re-enable it. The HUD canvas, I'm going to re-enable it. And the inventory canvas, I'm actually going to rename this inventory menu canvas just to make it super duper clear. I'm going to hide this one for the time being. And let's just double click my player so I can remember like where it is in the scene, and I'm going to get out of 2D mode. Alright, so I think this is an inventory object, right? Yeah, this is a note. So if I just move the player a little bit over here and click this note, I will be able to see what happens when this line of code gets called. I will give you a preview, a spoiler. It's not going to work right. Alright, check it out. Here's our console, and it says object reference not set to an instance of an object. Alright, well, I'm like, which object reference might that be? So I'm going to double click it and see where it takes me. Oh, what do you know? It took me right here. So the reason that we got the null reference exception is that I tried to access my inventory menu.instance, but it doesn't exist because the inventory menu script is not on any object that's in my scene. So even though it's not on any object in my scene, there's nothing stopping me from just trying to access it like this. So that's the oversight in how I've currently implemented my Singleton pattern. So I'm not guaranteed that this thing actually exists. So I need to change. Well, I could change my functionality here in this getter to make sure one actually exists, or like say you can do something like spawn a new game object and then create a new one of these scripts and attach it to it. That's one way you can do that. Or you could maybe search the scene for the game object in question that makes sense for this to be on and add it to it. But I don't think that makes sense in this case, because I'm never going to have a level that's not going to have my inventory menu in it. So I am going to just make a very nice error message that makes it very clear what went wrong if someone ever tries to access the menu and there isn't an instance of this script in the scene. So we'll say something like if instance with the lowercase I equals null, we'll throw some very specific exception. Throw new system.exception. And this is just how you make kind of like a custom error message. And we will say there is currently no inventory menu. I should make my capitalization correct. Instance, but you are trying to access it. Something like that. Or I could say something like make sure the inventory menu script is applied to a game object in your scene. Okay, so that's pretty specific. So let's save it and just kind of demonstrate how that error will look now. So when I run the game and I try to grab an inventory object, it says there's currently no inventory menu instance, but you are trying to access it. Make sure the inventory menu script is applied to a game object in your scene. Cool. All right. Well, let's make sure that there's an inventory menu script on in my scene somewhere. What do I want to put it on? I think I'm going to put it on this inventory menu canvas game object, which is part of why I renamed it. The inventory menu, it says the name of the thing that I'm going to put the script on, so that makes it a little easier to reason about where this script might be. So I'm going to go ahead and add the inventory menu script to the inventory menu canvas game object. Now, because that this script is on a game object that's actually in my scene, awake will get called and we can initialize the instance static variable here, and the property will actually have something to give us, and we shouldn't get the error. So let's save and let's just test that out. I'm going to run the game. Well, let's go back and this is a curious issue, I suppose, because I can't really pick things up while this menu is visible, but if I disable this game object, I won't be able to call the awake on this script. So I need to sort of make it, I need to not totally turn this off, but I need to make it not visible so that I can see behind it to test my game. So in order to do that, I'm going to add something called a canvas group. And the reason I'm going to add the canvas group, man, I just keep having typos here. I do not want a canvas, just canvas. Okay, anyway, the thing about a canvas group component is it allows us to adjust the alpha of the entire canvas. So I can make this thing invisible or not interactable without disabling this whole game object, which would disable my inventory menu script and mess everything up. And I'm going to need this anyway because I'm going to have some sort of button that I press as a player that shows and hides my menu, and if that functionality is in this script, I can't really disable this script. So I need a way to hide this thing and make it not interactable without disabling my script as well. And I'm going to use the canvas group as a way to do that. So anyway, I'm going to adjust this down to 0, which, just to show you what it does, here's the game window. You can see as I adjust the alpha, it comes in and out of visibility. You could make an animation if you wanted this to fade in. Anyway, yeah, actually, if you ever want to fade in for your game, you just make a giant panel that's all black and you fade it in like that. You animate that. Anyway, I want this turned so that it's not visible and it's not interactable for the time being. And I'm going to run my game and just verify that clicking this does not give me the error any longer. So check it out. Now we are able to actually log the name of the game object that the inventory menu script is on, because this is no longer a null. We're no longer getting a null reference exception when we try to access this. So we're sort of using static here, but it's not a static class. So the Singleton pattern kind of gives you a way to eat your cake and have it too, I suppose. But it is going to, like we demonstrated here, it requires a little bit more complexity and it opens the door to some errors. So you really only want to do it if you absolutely can't get away with doing this simpler setup like we have here, where we just make the whole class static, we make this list static, done. Alright, so remember the Singleton pattern, it also says that we have to ensure a class has one instance. We've taken care of the global point of access, but we need to ensure that there's only one inventory menu ever. And that makes sense for our game. Like, we don't want to have multiple inventory menus. It's not a multiplayer game. So at this point, there's really nothing enforcing that. I could make, I could go in and duplicate the inventory canvas game object, and I would suddenly have 2 inventory menu scripts. Or I could just put the inventory menu script on all kinds of game objects, and that would also give me all kinds of inventory menu scripts. And that's not what I want. So we need to figure out a way to, as it's worded here, ensure that this class only has one instance. So in order to do that, let's go take a look at where we are initializing the singleton, right here, where we say instance equals this. This is where we need to check to see if there already is one of these. So we can do something like this, where we say if instance equals null. At that point, we want to go ahead and do this. That means, so if there is no instance yet, this is our instance. But if there is an instance, we'll go into this else statement here, right? And so this will be where we could try to throw an exception. New system.exception, and we'll say there is already an instance of inventory menu, and there can only be one. Alright, so we can test that out. Let's try to put a second inventory menu script somewhere. Make sure you save. Go on back to the game. I'm just going to throw another inventory menu script on just any random old game object. Like, how about this cylinder thing? Inventory menu. So Now that there are two inventory menu script instances, they each will have their awake called at the beginning of the scene, and we'll see what happens here. It's important to understand also that when you're doing a singleton like the way we're doing it here, this sort of rendition of it at least, we're going to want to initialize it in awake and not start, because there's also a chance, there's also a chance that some other script could try to look at this instance before this code happens. So in other words, if another script, if their awake gets called before this one's awake, and that awake function in that script, it tries to access this instance thing, we'll get this error here. So anyhow, make sure you're doing this in awake is what I'm saying. But in any event, right now we're going to test what happens if we try to have more than one. Let's run the game, and hopefully we should see an error. There it is. And so we can see there is our error. Alright, but lucky for us, we don't actually want to have that script anywhere else. So this is a useful error message. It's just kind of like a reminder that we can't do that. So let's make sure we remember to remove this extra script here. It was only there just to test our error message. So now we got nice robust error messages to help make sure nothing goes wrong.